Hey, everybody, and welcome to week 5 of Stat Chasing. We now have 4 weeks of data on the NFL season so far, so it's enough to draw some interesting conclusions about what we've seen. So, excited to break it down with all of you today. Drico, how was your week 4 for fantasy?
Week 4, just a brutal disappointment. Absolutely smashed in everything. I won my home league though, so that's all that matters, right? I
Yeah,
squeaked it out Monday night, the last Cooper Cup, 20-yard catch and then 9-yard catch. Just clawed it right at the end.
there is something about that home league that, you're paying like $50 for the league, but something about it still feels sweeter than the
Right, we lost in
fantasy.
the main, but I won my home league.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to take. I mean, week 4 was a time to celebrate small victories because I did not have a lot of big ones as well. It was a tough week. One of those weeks where you look at red zone and it's showing the top scorers at each position, and it's just random players that you don't have on any of your teams. So
Right, but
it was that type of week for me.
my redacted is doing
Yeah,
redacted.
exactly. Um, cool. Well, without further ado, why don't we just dive into quarterbacks for this week?
Sounds
So,
good to me.
yeah, let's do it. Um, so, for folks familiar with stat chasing, you'll be familiar with this chart. For anybody who may be new to the program, we're going to go through position by position and look at some of the most important stats to predict future success at each position. So, we start here with quarterback. What we're looking at on this chart here, for those following along on YouTube, we have TD rate here on the y-axis and then adjusted yards per attempt on the x-axis. And what adjusted yards per attempt is yards per attempt, but adjusted for touchdowns and interceptions. So players who throw a lot of interceptions will be
Punished.
punished exactly, and folks who throw a lot of touchdowns will spike in that metric. So, Drico, we now have 4 weeks of data on these quarterbacks. I think we see a couple familiar faces at the top with Mahomes and Lamar that we've talked on. But do any names jump out, out here? If I was to tell you, before week 1 that X player was showing up in the top right hand side of this chart, maybe talk about a player sort of surprising so far for us.
So yeah, I think that's a really important approach because you look at the underdog resurrection ADP, and there's two quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen in the first round. Um, so you really do have to you have to try and get some value. Um, I don't think there's
Mhm.
any secret as to who the most surprising quarterback in the top right hand corner, and it's Geno Smith. Uh,
Mhm.
he's got the rushing yards. He's got some touchdown efficiency, and he's been scoring points as well. Um,
Yeah, I think Gino is. Let's talk about Gino for a little bit. I know there's some interest on the ship chasing Discord to discuss that as well. So to give some context on how the market views him, he's still sitting with an ADP of 165 in the best ball resurrection. So
I think
that's
I've been watching the trends of these. I think that 165 is going right up.
yeah.
Like probably not up to where Chua was getting to, but he's not going to sit around for 165 for very long. I don't think.
I don't think so either. I think that this ADP moves around quite rapidly. I think because there's not a huge volume of drafts going on. I think he will move up. I think if we're just talking about that price right there, I think that's a solid value. Not necessarily because I think Gino is some amazing quarterback or anything like that, but I do think this offense is very predictable from a pass catcher perspective. So I think you can get both the Seattle wide receivers at a decent discount right now. And if you stack them with Geno Smith, if Geno has a big game, it's going to go to DK Metcalf at an ADP of around 60 right now, and then Tyler Lockett an ADP of around 85. So DK's dropped a little bit from his preseason ADP. Lockett's up a little bit, but I think both those prices compared to the wide receivers in that range are pretty solid. So I like, if Geno stays somewhere in that range, I like that stack just because of the predictable nature of it. And again, it also looks like a team with a bad defense that could get in some shootout
Well,
games. So
on top of that, the reasons that I like it, so the Seattle now they actually have a positive pass rate over expectation. It's not very high, but it is still positive. And there's like it's Geno Smith, but there also is reasons to believe that they're going to be somewhat efficient. Like they do have that. That is actually a really strong pass catching group of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Noah Fant. Even Will Dissly has been like playing well. And then you add in the rushing upside. Do you think that perhaps Geno Smith might be what we wanted Marcus Mariota to be?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I was definitely more on Mariota even after the first couple weeks. But man, Atlanta, it's tough for me with Atlanta because I think on the one hand, you could see the first 4 weeks and see a steady decline in Atlanta's pass attempts and say, hey, they see what Mariota's doing out there when he's throwing the ball. They want to hide him more. They want to continue to make that offense more run heavy to sort of hide him. But also, they've just been in these weird games where they've been able to keep leads against teams like Cleveland and the Saints and sort of these weird game scripts where I think at some point they're not going to be able to do that. I don't think Atlanta's that good of a team. They're sitting at 2-2 right now. And I think that's far above their expectations. So I do think Atlanta's going to be forced to throw a little bit more, and Mariota can have more of a spike week profile. But so far, it's just been kind of like these ugly sort of floor games for Mariota where you're not really seeing a lot of upside there. So if I was to pick, I guess to more directly answer your question, if I was to pick right now, like assuming they're pretty similar priced, I would probably go Geno over Mariota. I think he has slightly more job security than Mariota, and he's just frankly he's playing a lot better right now. So yeah, are you on that page there? Are you Geno over Mariota if it was sort of similar price?
Yeah, I think so too. You don't really have risk of him losing his job, and they're also, I mean, they're 2-2, so it's not like they've been piling up these losses, which is something that would encourage a coach to rethink things. They obviously had that really high scoring victory against admittedly a bad Lions defense, and that should help.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that there probably is some regression. Like that kind of efficiency is probably hard to expect for the rest of the year. But I do think like positive pass rate over expectation, strong weapons, and I guess a new seemingly woke Pete Carroll. And like those are reasons to expect good offense. Like they're doing the fundamental stuff that wins games and scores points. They're doing that. So that is something where I do feel compelled to push my priors a good bit on Geno Smith.
Yeah. It is a funny troll job from Pete Carroll to when he finally gets rid of Russ Wilson. Seattle finally has a positive pass rate over expected, and now Denver you're seeing has a pretty negative pass rate over expected. So the let Russ cook thing, it's just a funny way for that to have turned out. Another thing, Drico, I wanted to talk about. I think we talked about Hurts a little bit last week in the context of he has this incredible adjusted net yards per attempt. And if you just look at yards per attempt, just the basic unadjusted metric, Hurts is leading the league there as well. So, and again, the thing that's interesting about that to me on this chart you see is that he has one of the lower TD rates in the entire league. And I think part of that is that at first, like you can say, oh, he has a ton of upside. Then you remember, okay, part of the reason he has such a low TD rate is because that's a passing TD rate, and Jalen Hurts has a handful of rushing touchdowns on the year. So when they get in close, he's rushing them in instead of throwing it throwing them in.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, though, at the same time, the way I interpret that is there's upside for the Eagles pass catchers, not necessarily upside for Hurts, because passing touchdown, rushing touchdown, if you trade those out, that's not much of a difference. He actually might lose some points
Right,
if he passes more in the red zone. It's a negative, right? But for the receivers, I think AJ Brown only has one touchdown on the year. I believe Javonte and Goddard only have one or two. I'm shooting from the hip here a little bit, but they all have pretty low touchdown totals, and I think that's hiding a bit of their upside, especially with AJ Brown. And we'll talk about him more when we get the wide receivers. But I think just the fact that Hurts is such a low passing TD rate, I think that is due for positive regression, and that's going to help out Devonta, AJ Brown, and Goddard quite a bit.
So I did the maths. There is a lot of to do that to that. So he does have 4 rushing touchdowns on the year. However, he also only has 4 passing touchdowns. So even if you add that together, that gives him like a 6.5% touchdown rate. Like that's still lower than like. And now this is obviously a little bit misleading, but Bailey Zappi, like, it's lower than Jared Goff, and it's lower than Lamar Jackson. All of who he does have that higher, even without even with the lower touchdown, he still has the higher adjusted yards per attempt and much higher yards per attempt. So I think that's true that the that some of the reason is the lower some of the reason for the lower touchdown rate is that he runs him in, but he could still also add on additional passing touchdowns, which is kind of nuts. Now I'm acting like I knew this all along. I literally just did the maths on that. I thought that was a great point.
No, just to add on that a little bit, like Kenneth Gainwell has 2 rushing touchdowns on only 15 attempts all year. Boston Scott has 1 touchdown on just 10 attempts all year. So I think those are a bit those rates are a bit fluky. I think Sanders 3 touchdowns and 72 attempts, we can expect that more or less to stick. That sounds about right. But some of these fluky Gainwell and Boston Scott touchdowns that have happened, I think easily, if AJ Brown doesn't get tackled at the 5 or the 2-yard line on some of these plays, we could see Hurts having even bigger upside there. So I think that's interesting as a guy who is already flashing this sort of incredible quarterback ceiling, that there's still, I think, some room to grow there.
There's still meat on the bone.
Yep.
So I think we talked about this a little bit. So I know to make this chart readable, we have to limit it to 1 quarterback per team. But I do see Tua Tagovailoa has an ADP of 96. The scoring in this doesn't start until week 6, and he is in the concussion protocol, and that obviously really unfortunate. I think given the overall landscape of quarterbacks being so expensive, even if he doesn't play, let's say week 6, I think that's a lot of cushion. Given how well he's played, and like it's interesting here that you can see Teddy Bridgewater hasn't played nearly as well. So I think there's evidence here that there is a pretty good skill component for Tua. I think that's still a pretty good value there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm guessing some of that is just fear that there's a longer absence with the second concussion, and we'll get more information on that. But we've talked about this a little bit. The prices you have to pay on the quarterbacks in the resurrection right now is insane. You have Lamar Jackson going at pick 9. You have Josh Allen going at pick 10. Jalen Hurts at pick 15. Patrick Mahomes at pick 20. And even someone like Joe Burrow, who hasn't started off the season hot, he's going at pick 50. So I think with all this uncertainty at the other positions, it's really driving the elite quarterbacks and even sort of like the mid-tier quarterbacks up quite aggressively. So I think this Tua discussion is with that framing in mind, that to take down the best ball resurrection, I think it's really important to think about some of these mid-tier quarterback values because the opportunity cost with Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts, it's not like it was in the summer where you could hammer those
I mean,
guys in the 5-6
QB4 at
turn.
pick 20.
Yeah.
Like that's obviously not as expensive as like a Superflex ADP. Not nearly as expensive, but it's a lot closer to that than a single QB price.
Yeah. And I thought that the elite quarterbacks were as a whole underpriced this offseason, besides Josh Allen, maybe. I thought it was like such an easy click to go with Hurts, Lamar, Kyler at like the 50s
Yeah.
and 60s. So it's really, I did one of these drafts this afternoon. It's really making me rethink my whole draft strategy because it was so just geared towards elite quarterback this offseason. And now I'm like, I got to get a little more creative with the Tuas, the Trevor Lawrences, even the underperforming veterans like Stafford, Rodgers, Carr. Can some of these guys still hit a ceiling that we haven't seen yet this season and pay off at much cheaper prices? And I think generally that's going to be my approach. I'm looking in that tier more so than paying a first round price for Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts.
So continuing that team of like just trying to find guys who can be good where you don't have to break the bank. How much weight do you put on the fact that Jared Goff still played really, really well? Like he won people tournaments last week, despite missing like several of his best players who should come back at some point. And then they also have Jameson Williams like waiting in the wing, and he's going to take that deep threat role, and like is an absolute stud.
Yeah, if you listen to the show last week, we were hyping up Goff, I think at pick 140. He's now something around there. He's now at pick 110-ish. I'm still, I think, pretty in on that price. I think just as you made a great point, Drico, the fact that he's still smashed without some of his best weapons out, and there's potential for his weapons to get even better with Jameson Williams back. I think it's just a really good system for Goff right now with some pretty solid depth, a good mix of depth and star players in that offense that they've shown to be pretty resilient to injuries to one or two guys. So, that defense is going to be really bad. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to throw, be aggressive on fourth downs. They're going to have a relatively high pass rate over expectation. I am still completely fine with Jared Goff in the 110s. And I think, with Goff too, another positive thing that we maybe forgot is he's kind of shown this before with some of his years on the Rams where, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here a little bit, but he was, a top 10 quarterback in redraft. That's how the market valued him when he had a good system and a good set of weapons there. And I think we're kind of seeing it again with him. He's had a couple down years on some bad teams. And now in this good system, he's shown he's able to perform. And I don't see any reason to shy away from him at pick in the 110s where he's going right now.
So just to kind of illustrate some of the impact of their bad defense. So they're situation neutral pace. So they're playing at 29 seconds per snap in situation neutral. But when they're trailing, they are at 25 seconds a snap. So like that's 4 snaps. That's 4 seconds a snap over like a full game. Like I don't know how many extra plays that is, but it's a lot of extra plays.
Yeah, and I misspoke. They're actually their pass rate over expected is actually slightly negative. So they're pretty neutral in terms of pass rate over expected. So it really is more game script driven. But I don't see their defense getting better. And it's not like they're getting torn up by elite offenses. They're getting torn up by Geno Smith, the likes of that, who maybe is elite now. I don't know. But it's not like they played the Chiefs and the Bills and all these amazing teams every week. They're kind of getting chewed up by what we think of as league average or worse offenses. Drico, last quick hit I wanted to say in quarterback. I think if we're again have the best ball resurrection focus, I think Jimmy G is a pretty clear value if you're looking in the quarterback twos. He's priced at pick 167 right now. And again, it's not like if I was talking one quarterback, I'm not excited about Jimmy G. But I think on teams where you wait for your quarterback one and need to go for three quarterbacks, I think Jimmy G is a really good value. He has a ton of pass catchers that can bail him out. We saw it with Debo last night or whenever that game was, where Debo can take a slant 70 yards to the house. We know Kittle can do insane things after the catch. Ayuk can make crazy plays going deep. So if SF gets in a game script where they're forced to throw a little bit more, I just think the pass catchers give Jimmy pretty solid upside there. And he also has no risk of losing his job, which I think some of the other guys in that range, Mariota, Wentz even has some risk there. And then you have guys like Jameis, who has a broken back, Tannehill with Willis.
Somebody I do like in that range is Kenny Pickett.
Yep.
So if you look, just to start with the bad, if you look at his adjusted yards per attempt, he actually, because he threw the 3 interceptions on 13 attempts, he actually has a negative adjusted yards per attempt. Which
yeah, I had to eliminate him from this chart because he was so far off to the left.
Yeah, I remember looking like, where is he?
Yeah.
But
that's a fluke.
If you look at it on a straight yards per attempt, he does have 9.2 yards per attempt, which, I mean, he's strong aggressively, right? He had the rushing touchdowns. He had 15 yards rushing, which is not great, but it adds something. And they do have pretty strong weapons, and their defense is absolutely terrible. So I think he could be someone where you are probably going to get like some not strong days, just because how the team is bad. But you do have aggressive play, you have rushing, and you have probably favorable game script and some pretty strong weapons.
Yeah, and I think all the weapons are pretty underpriced right now, so we'll get into that later. I'm with you there on Pickett. So let's move on to the running backs. That was a solid breakdown of the quarterback position. Again, here, just for folks listening or folks maybe unfamiliar with the chart, we're looking at running back expected fantasy points and efficiency. So on this graph here, we see receiving expected fantasy points on the y-axis, rushing on the x-axis. You sort of add those two together, and you get an idea of the running back's overall expected workload in terms of expected fantasy points. The size of the dots here is fantasy points over or under expected. So the guys with the larger dots are outperforming their expected fantasy points workload. The guys with the smaller dots or dots you can't even see, like Joe Mixon, are underperforming their expected workload. So, Drico, I think we have to start off this chart by talking about Joe Mixon. He's maybe one of the most confounding players this season at fantasy. Just an insane workload, but some of the worst efficiency I've seen over a 4-game stretch with that type of workload. What are you making of the situation?
Small. You ever watch Community, where it's like the meme that came out for the Asian guy that he's like, that's me on the Joe Mixon dot.
Yeah, it's you need a magnifying glass to see Joe Mixon on this chart. But he's breaking the chart in 2 ways. He's breaking it in that he's got so many more expected fantasy points than anybody else, but he's also breaking it in the fact that like the efficiency is so bad that it makes every other back look like great by comparison. Like it skews the entire chart in 2 ways. So I don't know. I'm a little. Do you have a Joe Mixon take? I have some thoughts, but I'm curious. Like how are you treating this? Maybe from a best ball resurrection lens. How do you treat a guy with the best workload in the league, but terrible efficiency going at the end of the second round in drafts?
I mean, I don't think my answer has changed too much from last week, in that the high expected points is being driven just by total overall play volume.
Okay. Yeah.
Which itself is being driven by not good efficiency. And I mean, we generally think of running back expected point or fantasy points over expected as kind of a volatile stat. But he obviously he is underachieving on the touchdown front, but he's also underachieving on the what you call it, on the rushing yards over expected. And
Yeah.
I don't know that
Yeah.
I'm a
It's
little
tough.
bit. How do you trust that, or how do you play that? That
Yeah.
seems. I'm not interested. I want good players.
Yeah. The thing for me is that I don't love Joe Mixon, the talent, but I do think he's quite a bit better than what he's shown in these first 4 weeks. Last year he wasn't incredibly efficient or smashing his expectation uh, in terms of sort of a per touch basis or yards per route run basis, but he was scoring a ton of touchdowns, and that saved him. And I think for me, it's just at an ADP at the back end of the second round, running back is just so incredibly thin right now that I do think he has the workload, and I'd still think the Cincinnati offense can be good. That I think I want to take some stabs at that price because I think he still has the 3 touchdown game in his range of outcomes. This volume that he's shown right now, I think he now has sort of like the 6-7 catch game in his range of outcomes, but it's more going to be compiling than efficiency, which is why, like, if he was going in the first round, I would be out. But I think in that range, when a lot of the elite wide receivers are gone, I'm willing to sort of plug my nose and draft a little bit of Joe Mixon at that price. I think he can't be, I totally agree with your point that a lot of this workload is propped up by the fact they've run so many plays. But even if you take that out, like, and we flip forward a couple charts, he's still got like the 5th best role sort of in the NFL in terms of percent of his team snaps where he's getting a rush or a pass route. So I think there's some stickiness there where even if the plays regress, his role, he's being drafted at what, like the RB10 or something? No,
RB7.
RB7. Yeah, I think that's still like a slight value compared to his role and some regression and efficiency. But I can see your side of things. Like it's not a pick that feels fun at all.
So my the reason that I would disagree. So obviously I get the take on why, like, I'm not a fan of him as a player. But when somebody has played that poorly, um, even though the position itself has struggled as a whole, it's like I still approach fantasy football in that, like, I'm trying to get the most talented roster that I can, and I don't think I can take him over Jalen Waddle, T Higgins, Swift. Even though Swift does have the injury, he's going right alongside Deebo Samuel.
Yeah,
If you're offering me that choice, like, those guys are just so much more talented, and we've seen, like, how high the ceilings that wide receivers can hit, even in the half PPR. I would just rather take I'd rather take my risks elsewhere at running back.
that's fair. That's fair. I definitely see that side of it. But yeah. Anyways, I think some other guys to hit on here that are interesting to me. One would be Josh Jacobs. Again, kind of in that Joe Mixon category where he's not a fun player to talk about. I think a lot of people in our circle of fantasy football have dismissed Josh Jacobs for years, but he now has a really strong role, both in terms of this expected fantasy points view. He's in around the 15 expected fantasy points per game range, which is quite strong for where he was drafted. And then if you look at this chart here again, which shows percent of team snaps, he really spikes here relative to his cost. He has the 6th highest workload, meaning percent of his team's plays where he's getting a rush or a pass route. And right now, if you're looking for, running back values on the Best Ball Resurrection, he's going at a price of pick 75. And I think that is just way too low. That's going to go up. He had people are on the Josh Jacobs. He had a big game last week. That price is certainly bound to go up, but I don't think it'll go up enough because of this anchoring effect on Josh Jacobs. I think I'll let you talk about him, but the last thing I would add on Jacobs is I think for people that have dismissed him for a while, it hasn't even necessarily been that they think he's a bad talent. It's been that the role is really bad. They've always taken him off the field on passing downs and not really given him targets. I don't think anyone thinks he's like this amazing talent, but I think he's like, a 4-net-ish level talent. Like he's the same talent of guys that have put up big fantasy seasons before. So I'm pretty excited by this Jacob stuff so far. And if the price sticks in the 70s or 60s, I think that's a pretty easy click for me.
Yeah, I think he has a kind of dead zone profile in a way, but he doesn't have a dead zone price. So that's why it's different. And the difference for me as well, the big difference between him and Mixon is that Josh Jacobs has actually played well. Like it's not like he's just played on this amazing offense. Like he's actually like played really well. And he's earned his snap share, his workload, and he actually he could argue that he's been unlucky because his the biggest reason for his kind of like neutral-ish fantasy points over expected is because he hasn't got the right amount of he hasn't got the touchdowns that you would expect given his workload. And so I think if he were to go back to old Josh Jacobs price, I stopped being interested just because of the fragility of the position, and I don't think he's like an elite talent. But at current cost, it's a pretty easy selection, I think.
Yeah. Agreed.
Any
other guys you wanted to hit on here, Drico?
Do I have any other players? Indeed, I do. So Breece Hall, I think you're probably everybody will see this everywhere. He's the starter now. Pick 46. It's too cheap. He's obviously going to be higher, but while you can get him anywhere around there, great value. An even bigger value, I think, is J.K. Dobbins at pick 57. So he's in that kind of I guess he's in between 10 and 15 points expected points per game, which coming back from the serious injury that he is really, I think is really, really encouraging. And he's so talented. The offense is so good. Obviously Jackson takes some of the touchdowns off the table, but that's not destiny. An offense that scores that many points is going to have points for the back. And I see that as a really, really probably one of the most attractive picks in direction.
Especially in half PPR, right? Like if we're talking full PPR and say he was a 3rd round pick or something, I'd be like, I don't know if he has the receiving profile to live up to that. But yeah, at his price on a half PPR website, he can get there through touchdowns. I think, if I'm making my list of the top 10 guys who are most likely to have a multi-touchdown game in any given week, I think Dobbins is already knocking on that door already, and his role has room to grow as the season goes on. Also, Justice Hill, worth mentioning, I think left the game with a somewhat serious injury this week. Need to follow up on that, but that could even open up things further because I really think they don't trust these Kenyon Drake, Mike Davis dust balls. Again, I guess Gus Edwards will be back at some point, but there could be even more opportunity with a Justice Hill injury there. Cool. Last thing on the AFC, Derrick Henry. I think it is worth mentioning that he's gotten 5 and 6 targets in each of the past 2 weeks. I don't know if that's just noise or the coaching staff realizing, hey, we used Derrick Henry in the passing game last year and it worked. Let's try that again. But it has, just from watching the games, it looks like they've ripped off some solid screen plays with Derrick Henry out there. And I expect, I don't expect 6 targets a week, but I do expect like more in the 3 to 4 range now versus the first 2 weeks when he just had 0. So I think that does give some hope to Henry drafters that ceiling from last year is still there if he does have those 5 to 6 target games. And we know he can rip off the long run or, roast the Texans for 40 fantasy points in a given week. So I think that this
drafting him at midway through the second round.
No, I'm probably not. I think that this comment was more, I think it looked really bad for Henry after 2 weeks.
Right.
And I would have been like selling him low at like a late third round value, equivalent in my leagues. I think now he's maybe like, I think he should go a few picks lower. I would certainly take, looking at the wide receivers right now, I would take Amon-Ra over him. I would take Debo over him. I would probably take, I think he fits in sort of the Mixon range at the end of the second.
That makes sense. I think there's probably the most exciting in DFS, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there is a discussion. We probably don't have the time for it today, but just with how thin running back looks right now, that it's almost becoming, and maybe like we sort of already viewed it this way, but it's almost becoming a little bit like the tight end position where there's so few guys that really have like upside right now at the running back position that when I'm on the clock and I'm thinking about Derrick Henry in the second round versus Jalen Waddle, I know in a vacuum that Waddle is almost certainly the better pick and projects for more fantasy points and all of that. But with the wide receivers, I can build around later versus some of the running backs later. I may be inclined on some teams to go with sort of the anchor.
Right. And I mean, that's why anchor RB works so well, why it's so popular. Because you can get a guy like Henry, make the bet that, hey, he's going to be like this all year. If he is, I win a bunch of money.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, the only thing would be the age, but I think I would agree more than not.
Yeah. No, the long-term age, everything, there's some red flags, but I think the last 2 weeks he's shown that Derrick Henry ceiling is still there, and maybe a way that weeks 1 and 2 I was a little spooked about.
Right. You can still play.
Yeah. Okay. I think we should hit while we're on the AFC side. This chart doesn't show it, but maybe some folks don't realize in Miami there seems to have been a takeover last week with Mostert playing a lot more snaps than Edmonds. I think he almost doubled him up in terms of snaps and routes run. Edmonds still seems to be getting the favored looks in the red zone, and we've seen sort of flip-flopping back and forth over these first 4 weeks, so I'm not like locking in Mostert to that dominant share of snaps there, but worth mentioning is maybe something that went under the radar. If you just looked at the box score quickly, you wouldn't have picked that up necessarily. Cool. Moving on to the NFC. Again, we have Barkley, who you made the case for as the number 1 running back in the resurrection, showing up pretty strongly here.
And now he is the number 1 running back.
And he is. Yeah, we're market movers here at Statues.
Right.
Yeah, but I think, I think that market is right there. I think if you wanted to go McCaffrey over Barkley, that's the only one where I can see the reasoning for it. I think with Taylor's injury, you can't do that anymore. But anyways, I think these top guys get a lot of attention. Drico, is there maybe any sort of the more unheralded names here or situations that you found interesting in week 4?
Yeah. So I think two of the situations that we should hit on are the two injury situations, and I guess before we move on to the NFC, do you want to talk about the Denver situation?
Yeah, we should hit on that. Yeah.
So I guess I'll shoot first. So I think the biggest concern for me in that whole backfield is that once it happened, they immediately bring in Latavius Murray, and it feels to me as a very kind of like strong situation for, or say a very likely scenario. The most likely scenario is it becomes this 3-man backfield of like, so they've trusted Melvin Gordon for like highly for the last couple of years, but he hasn't played well at the start of the year. Boone has been mostly special teams player and never really gotten like a high snap share. Obviously he has juice, but never really gotten a high snap share. And then the first thing they do is bring in Latavius Murray, who did actually show decent juice last week in London. So I think my overall approach would be to try and attack the situation in as most price conscious way as possible.
Yeah. I think I am a little bit more bullish on Boone than you are. I think so. It depends. I guess let's talk about something like a league like the Football Guys Championships or the FFPC main event right now. I think you don't get many chances on waivers to get a running back who, one, led his team in snaps the week before. That only is going to happen, a couple times over the course of the year. And two, I think the second data point I like on Boone is they were looking to get him involved in week 3, even before Javonte went down. It went a little bit under the radar, but it actually kind of turned into this gross 3-man committee in week 3 with Boone getting some snaps. So I see that, the fact that he got snaps in week 3, the fact that he passed Gordon in week 4. I know Gordon was banged up. He had the fumble. There's some sort of confounding factors there, but he did have more snaps than Gordon in week 4 after Javonte went down. I am kind of taking a risk off those two data points and being a little bit more aggressive on Boone. I see the Murray signing as more of a signal that they just need some veteran depth in the building. If Gordon is still banged up or, someone in the RB3 position. But I think I would be more in the 20 to 30% of your budget range for Boone, which probably isn't even enough to get him. Maybe I'm just more aggressive than you, but I'm not as aggressive as the market is.
I guess my only thing is so these guys who can take over backfields, they have to be kind of maybe not superstars, but they have to be very strong NFL talents. Do you think Boone is a strong NFL talent?
No, but I think he's a league average NFL talent. And I think at the running back position, if the team believes in you and just gives you a lot of carries and lets you run a lot of routes, you can
score
there. Yeah, you can score.
I guess we should probably move on soon. But my only thing would be if he's an average NFL talent, aren't those the guys who get in 3 committee backfields?
Yeah, but it's just I'm more so comparing it to other running backs that are going to be available on waivers through the course of the year. And this is a guy that at least had a role on his team for 2 consecutive weeks. There's not that many guys on waivers that even have any kind of role on their team. So if a guy already has a role, then a major injury happens and opens up more snaps for him. It's not like I think Boone is just amazing talent, but we have this signal from the team that like him. There's this opportunity for him to earn more talent. And, going way back to his Minnesota days, he did flash a bit of a ceiling in his 3 starts to end the 2020 season. He had an RB1 week in week 17 and an RB2 week in week 15. So he has kind of already shown that like he can get there, not like a league winning running back, but like a running back that could be super valuable to a 0 RB roster.
So
But
let me ask you this: up to what pick would you take him in the resurrection?
I think I took him today on the team I drafted because he's going at an ADP of 189. I think I took him around like 170 because I was just playing the ADP game. But I would, looking at the guys on the list right now, I would take him. Let's see, man, these prices are all over the place. I think in the 140s, and that's not to say that every running back ahead of him I like better and every running back behind him I like worse, but just generally looking at these prices here, I think I would take him in like the 130s, 140s range.
I think I'm more in like the 150s, 160s. So
yeah,
that's one of those things where like it's a small difference probably. But when you hash it out, it sounds much larger than it actually is. And you're the host, so I don't want to take over it too much, but I do think we should talk about the NFC case of that where Cordarrelle Patterson went on the free IR.
Yeah, we should talk about that. And then, yeah, so I think this one, my take on the Atlanta one is, so looking at this chart here, let's start with Cordarrelle Patterson's expected fantasy points. He's only in around the 5 to 10 expected fantasy points range. That's decent, but not great. So from that perspective, he's not really leaving behind a huge workload. And then if we look at his this other view of sort of his rush attempt share and route share, again, he shows up at the far right-hand side of this chart for the running backs, getting more than 45% routes and rush attempts. So again, it's like a top 30 role in the NFL, but it's not that big of a role. Actually, it's kind of in like, the Ramondre Stevenson level of role that he has right now. So taking those two data points together, he doesn't have a ton of expected fantasy points. He doesn't have like a ton of snaps that he's leaving behind. He's more so been getting there so far this year on an efficiency standpoint. When he is on the field, they're designing looks for him. They're getting him the ball, and he's like been awesome. Frankly, when you see him run the ball, he's like hurdling dudes and smashing into guys and running it down the field. So that's all to say that I think Patterson has been getting there on efficiency and not so much volume, which makes me less excited about the likes of Algier, Caleb Huntley, Damian Williams when he comes back, because I think actually Patterson's not leaving behind that big of a role. He's just an awesome player, and nobody's going to be able to sort of replicate what he does. They're going to sort of split this up, and it's going to be tough to trust these guys. That said, I'm adding Algier. Like I'd be bidding 150 for him or something, right? But like I'm not as excited compared to like someone like Boone. What do you think,
the way I would see it, so we were just talking when we were talking about the quarterbacks, is that one of the reasons that the Atlanta offense has been so bad for pretty much all the players, is they don't play fast enough, they don't throw enough, and we probably should expect that to improve to some degree. So I do think that there probably is a slightly bigger pie coming in kind of future weeks than we've seen for the first 4 weeks. And then I guess the one and now I know I think that Tyler Algier is probably the priority over the two of them.
Yeah.
But he did have a really strong receiving profile in college. He did get solid. He did get, I guess, okay draft capital. But the other thing about it is that he how do I say it? He does have talent. So it could be the type of situation where now that he I guess he gets a little bit more opportunity, that he gets a bigger chance to show that talent. And I think that this probably the strongest note for him is that once Patterson went down, he got all the receiving workload. Caleb Huntley didn't get a single target. So that just being able to consolidate all of the Atlanta receiving work from the backfield, that could be pretty solid value wise.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I'm definitely excited about Algier compared to the other Atlanta guys. So yeah, cool. I think I have a couple quick hits, and then we can move on to wide receiver. I think the Rashad White usage, if you didn't see that game in prime time, they were rotating series between him and Fournette. So that's really bullish. He had been basically relegated to a handful of snaps per game. They wanted to get him more involved, and we saw that pretty clearly in prime time. So I'm excited about Rashad White. Definitely grab him in any leagues where he is available. And yeah, I think I had something else, but I forgot it. Drico, any quick hits here before we can also look at the snap share chart quickly if you had anything you wanted to point on at that before we talk about wide receiver.
No, I think I made the I had my notes. I interrupted a good bit to make them.
Okay.
And so I'm good to go.
Yeah. Cool. Let's talk about receivers then.
It's for shame. We're 50 minutes in. This is a show hosted by Ship Chasing, and we're only now talking about the wide receivers.
Yeah, I know. We're probably gonna get fired. Actually, Pat just messaged me on Discord. We've been fired.
We've been canned. I feel shamed. I've brought shame to my family.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly. Okay. Let's hit these wide receivers. I'll quickly talk about this chart for people who are unfamiliar. We're looking at wide receiver opportunity versus fantasy points here as a way to identify potential sell highs and buy lows. So guys that are underperforming their expectations in terms of opportunity and guys that are overperforming. So we have our different quadrants here. On the y-axis, we have fantasy points per game. And then on the x-axis, we have weighted targets per route run, which is a good measure of opportunity. It's the number of targets you get per route you're on the field, but adjusted in terms of air yards. So adjusted for how far down the field you're getting that target, because a 50-yard bomb is worth more expected fantasy points than, a behind the line of scrimmage screen pass. So that's the general orientation of the chart. I think we should start off, Drico, by talking about, the headline of this show today, Allen Robinson just doing an awesome job sticking to his cardio routine on the field. He's really showing a lot of diligence there. Just, Stafford's not even looking his way, but he's just diligently running routes.
He's got his Fitbit on.
Yeah.
He's getting his steps in.
His Strava, if you check out his Strava profile, it's really impressive. He's running a lot of distance out there on the field. Yeah. But he's been, jokes aside, he's been a true disaster. And I think maybe a conversation worth having here is we can't rip Allen Robinson to shreds without talking about how Gabe Davis actually is profiling very similar to him on this chart. He's even seeing less weighted targets per route run. I don't know how that's possible with how bad Robinson has been, but yeah, Drico, interested in your Gabe Davis take. Like if Robinson is dead, which I think a lot of people think he is, he's got an ADP of around 100 on the best ball resurrection, and that's going to be dropping. That's going to be dropping rapidly. What do we think the deal with Gabe Davis is? He has not really fallen. People are still buying Gabe Davis at an ADP of 44. How do we reconcile those two?
I think that the biggest difference is that Gabe Davis he did have an ankle injury, that he's been playing through, and I think people are giving him a little bit of a pass on that, just because his prior efficiency was actually very good. Like his per route stuff, adjusted for ADOT in the last couple of years has actually been really strong. But there is some degree of signal in that a lot of the other receivers have been earning targets. Stephon Diggs has been a target machine he's returned to like vintage form Stephon Diggs, which doesn't leave a lot of room for anybody else. Yeah. I do think though that Gabe Davis will probably. I think he'll probably still be okay. Once I guess assuming the ankle does heal, just because his touchdown equity is so high, but it like I guess there's a lot of nuance here, but it would seem that on the margin he was too expensive this summer. And
what do you think about his ADP of 43 right now? Best Ball Resurrection. You have to take him ahead of Drake.
That's almost more expensive than the summer, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm shocked is that it hasn't really moved at all. I don't quite remember, but it was close to that in the summer. So that's what I'm trying to understand. Like, I agree with you. He's not dead. He's not Allen Robinson. I'm not like burying him, calling him a cardio specialist, but he's been really bad. And even with the ankle injury, like I'm pretty spooked. Like I am waiting for that price to fall. There's guys going behind him that just look so much more exciting to me. Chris Olave, Chris Godwin, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, even, Bateman. You can make an argument for a lot of guys going behind him instead of Gabe Davis right now that I'm not really touching that price of the 10-foot pole at ADP of 43.
Yeah. I agreed. There's for example, you've got Breece Hall. Even aside from wide receiver, you got Breece Hall, who is now a starting running back. And if like me, you're passing on Joe Mixon for Jalen Waddle, you're taking Breece Hall there over Gabe Davis there.
Yeah.
It is one of those things where it doesn't feel like we have the full information. In that he is running this really high percentage of snaps, but we don't actually know to what degree the ankle is hurting him. Like it's like you've got this wide range of like it could be absolutely slowing him down, and that's why he's not earning targets. And in 2 weeks' time, the ankle is going to be better, and he's going to smash. Or it could really be that he was just like an overhyped kind of third-year potential breakout.
Yeah. No, there's a big range there. The thing is, like, with the injury narrative, which the thing about it I don't quite buy is the fact that he is running 95 to 100. He's literally out there for every single play. Even in the game where they ran like a million plays, what was that, against Miami 2 weeks ago? He's still running like every single play. So if he was limited, you think they would be resting him somewhat. So that's what's weird to me. Like it certainly could be bothering him, and he's kind of like in this decoy role out there. But I'm kind of just not. If the injury was the issue, I would kind of expect to see a lower percent of routes run and like slightly better efficiency. Like we're seeing kind of the opposite, which is why I'm more spooked than optimistic on Gabe Davis.
Especially at same cost or higher.
Yeah. So let's hit on a couple questions from the chat or comments from the chat. Chris said, I think Pickens is a great buy low. And I think that's a great point from Chris. And I also wanted to talk about sort of the Steelers in general. I see Pickens popping in the buy low section of this chart. I also see Deontay popping there. Do you agree that those two Steelers guys are great buy lows?
Yeah, I particularly like Pickens. I particularly agree with Chris on Pickens. I actually had him in my notes as a player to call out, where he is getting this strong weighted targets per route run. And if the kind of small sample size data on Kenny Pickett being a bit more of an aggressive thrower, that would really suit George Pickens' play style. And that would be very, very interesting, especially at pick 100 or so. I think it's 104. I think that Deontay Johnson is so good that if the offense can kick things into gear, he obviously is a very, very strong buy there at 55. The reason I prefer Pickens more is just the price, because at that price, you can you have a bit more of an out in that he can, even if the offense doesn't kick up as much as we want, you still have the out of him becoming more of a 1B, which it looks like he's not too far off becoming, especially as a rookie who generally improve as the year goes on. So that would be my thought on those two players.
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that. I think I agree with all your points. I'd be drafting both at their current prices, and yeah, I agree. Pickens slightly more exciting. Casey commented, I thought this was interesting. He said Max Payne seeing Curtis Samuel in the sell high quadrant. I think Curtis Samuel is an interesting one because I think there's two things going on. One, part of the reason he shows up in the sell high quadrant is because we're showing weighted targets per route run, which ding guys like Samuel who see a pretty heavy target volume, but see a ton of them close to the line of scrimmage. He's not really getting a ton of air yards. But I think the role is still pretty strong for Samuel that I don't think that the market is really valuing. If they were valuing him super high, I would agree on like this chart's sell high designation here, but he's still only going at pick 75. And you also have the element where Jahan Dotson has a hamstring injury. It's not feared to be super serious, but he's going to be out a couple weeks. And hamstring injuries really, compared to a lot of injuries, they tend to linger. And if this offense condensed to, Diami Brown running wind sprints on the outside with then McLaurin and Curtis Samuel soaking up even more targets, I think there's even some kind of sneaky upside for Samuel over the next couple weeks and beyond. So I am not like necessarily agreeing with the sell high for him on his price. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. One point to make is that if you look at his fantasy points over expected, it's actually neutral. So, I think that the this chart it's a great chart, but Curtis Samuel might be like a no matter what chart you use, it's going to have some blind spots, and Curtis Samuel might be the blind spot of this chart.
I agree. Yeah, this is like a chart that's just set up for Samuel to fail, but I think his role is actually pretty strong. Okay, a couple I just want to give quick hitters for people listening on audio. Other sort of maybe unexpected names that are actually have really strong roles and I would be buying or even adding in shallower leagues. Jacoby Myers really has a quite strong targets per route run, and he might be dropped in some leagues because he's been injured the past couple weeks. DJ Chark, same story. I think his role is pretty strong. I like the Detroit offense. I'm picking him up if he's been dropped in any leagues. And then also Tyler Lockett, I think, is a guy worth calling out where that offense really seems to be condensing to Lockett and Metcalf. So I like those guys. Drico, any? Oh yeah, we should talk about Rondell Moore, who I think is on this.
He is on the. I think he's on the next chart.
Oh, he's on the next chart. Okay. Anybody else on this chart you wanted to talk about?
Yeah. So I did want to call out that Hollywood Brown has played much better over the past 2 weeks than he had when we called him out. He's actually kind of maintained the same kind of role of like being playing a lot on the outside, kind of getting the 11.5 range for ADOT. And in the last game, he actually won 2 contested catches. Despite and that's despite the offense kind of struggling. So I think it's probably one of those situations similar to Derrick Henry, where it's obviously you're disappointed that the offense is cratered, but it's looked an awful lot better than it did in the first couple of games. And a pick 50, I think, is like anybody who's going to be in the top right quadrant of this for the full-time guys outside the first 4 rounds is an easy buy for me. I also did want to call out that we just have actually got so many guys in this like strong performer range here at wide receiver, which has worked out very differently to what the preseason expectation was. Preseason expectation was that, oh, hey, wide receiver isn't as deep as this year. There's this dramatic fall off once you get outside of the top 2 rounds. And I don't think that's proven true. I think that it was obviously there was a lot of transition last year or this year, so it was harder to project which wide receivers would finish in this type of range. But I think it's been obviously a lot stronger for the top wide receivers than we were expecting going into the year.
Yeah, and you're seeing that with ADP, right? The number of running backs taken in the first 2 rounds now compared to at the start of the season has dropped way off because we have a lot of confidence in some of these wide receivers. So that's a good macro take, and I think something that's important to remember. Maybe for next year that these running backs can really fall off a cliff in terms of price after a couple weeks in a way that is much less common for the wide receivers. Now, I think a little bit of that is this year's been especially bad for some of the top running backs and especially good for some of the wide receivers. But I think it's sort of a general trend that we would expect over time. I wish somebody could make a draft strategy to profit off that, but I'm sure they're still working on it.
Still working on it. Still never won a major tournament.
Okay.
We're working on it this year, though.
Yeah, we'll see. It's looking good this year. So this chart here, we're now moving on to guys running 65 to 85% of routes. So they're still running a majority of their team's routes, but not the full complement. We teased this a little bit. Maybe let's start with Rondale Moore, Drico. He immediately came into I believe, around an 85% route share in week 1. So that Greg Dortch role that was pretty strong basically completely disappeared and just went to Rondale Moore. Actually, I think he's even on the other chart now that I'm looking at this closely. He actually appears.
There, he's right there.
Yeah.
On the 40 line.
Okay, yeah. So I don't have a lot to say about Rondale besides I think it's bullish that he ran 90% of his team's routes in week 1. He didn't perform, but yeah, that kind of just a simple.
So I've got some further points.
Yeah.
So he had an average depth. He had an ADOT of about 10.5, which for somebody where we were worried, hey, he's just a gadget guy. That's super encouraging. I think he played 2/3 of his snaps on the outside, so not as a slot receiver. Again, super encouraging for somebody that we had already pencil hold in for to be just a gadget player. And I guess he obviously didn't get the points. He didn't score many points, and his target share was not that high. But I do think that for a guy, he runs a sub 4.3, super productive in college.
Athletic freak, yeah.
Yeah, super freak in so many different combine measurements. And if now he has a role where he's also getting downfield targets, I don't know. That's just I'm probably a Rondale Moore super fan. But at pick 140, you want to talk about making up wide receiver later in drafts, that's to me that's a smash.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I was fading Rondale Moore this offseason. He was around to pick 110, but I'm adjusting my priors just to the fact that he was seeing that many snaps. I did not anticipate that. And the fact that we saw Greg Dortch perform in a pretty similar role that I think was kind of designed for Rondale. So at a price of 140, I'm certainly buying. I think actually in the draft I did today, I did a Kyler double stack with Rondale and Hopkins and felt pretty good about the price for Rondale. So yeah, I'm adjusting, good role. week one. I'm not too worried about like the actual fantasy point performance not being there, given how strong the role was. I think he's talented enough to flash there. Cool. This chart now, we finally moved on to the 65 to 85% of routes run guys. I think a lot of names in the strong performers you'd expect: Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs, Jalen Waddle, Drake London, hovering there. I think maybe London is an interesting guy to talk about, Drico, because he's been good. Like his role has been awesome. He's earning this insane target share. The fantasy point numbers have been like good, not awesome. He definitely had a down week. I'm just, I guess, like, how worried are you about the overall situation in Atlanta? And do you think that Drake London's talent can shine through? I think we're seeing that like Kyle Pitts' talent is like failing to shine through there. And I guess I'm like a little bit worried that that could happen to London for a stretch of the season. Is that a fair concern, or how are you viewing London with his price of around 50 or 43 ADP on Underdog Fantasy? How are you
But the
thinking
way
about
I
it?
see it is that if you look at both London and Pitts, if you look at their per route numbers, they're excellent. When the Falcons decide to throw the ball, London and Pitts absolutely eat. They feast. The problem, as we've been talking about for most of the show, is that they just haven't been throwing the ball enough.
Yeah.
I think that is generally the kind of situation that you do want to attack, of where the talent is so good and so obvious that nobody can deny it. The situation just hasn't been ideal. Generally would with somebody with something like that probably would like a little bit more of a discount than pick 43, but
Yeah.
if you're asking me, do I want to fade or even be light on Drake London? I don't think I can do that. Because there are just so many ways that the situation can get much better. Like the Falcons are like, I know that they have won some games, but they're losing games that they kind of shouldn't really be. And I don't think that they can continue playing the way that they have. This kind of links into Chris's point that we need Desmond Ridder to unlock those receivers. And I mean, I don't want to put the blame on Marcus Mariota either. The blame lies with Arthur Smith and their conservative play calling. But I just don't think that can last forever.
Yeah.
Or maybe it can last forever. I'm just kind of willing to buy on the hope, or what I perceive to be as a kind of like a really big smash situation if it does reverse.
That's fair. Yeah, I think you sold me a little bit there on London, that the role is just so strong. And I kind of made this point earlier in Atlanta that they've had some weird game script stuff that I think they'll be forced to throwing more at some point. And in that case, London and even Pitts to a lesser extent, I think can smash. Other points I wanted to make on this chart, I think Juju and Dubs, we've talked about the Packers and KC situations before, but I think Juju and Dubs are separating a little bit from the rest of their teammates from a target earning perspective. We're not really seeing it in the box score from a fantasy point perspective, but I think it's pretty clear. And I think this is the consensus take as well. It's not going to shock anyone. I think it's pretty clear that those are the guys you want in their respective offenses at wide receiver. Am I like incredibly excited about either? No, I think I'm a little more excited about Dubs. Oh my God, Dubs. Never mind. Dubs is going to pick 75. I think he was going at 100 something last week. So yeah, at pick 75, I'm not like dying to get Dubs, and then Juju's going at pick 73. So the market is seeing these guys similarly. I think they're the number one wide receivers in their teams, but not like impressive wide receiver one roles
Yeah,
necessarily. So
that's the thing though. Those is not an impressive role, but yet, and I don't know about you, but whenever I look at a rookie's kind of like early season utilization, I always kind of like adjust for what I think it'll look like in the back half, which is higher. And for me, when you see somebody play well, um, I think that you have to, especially a young player, you have to kind of like expect that as they play well, they do get a bigger role. Um, and I think we've talked about this on the show before, where the other options at wide receiver are so bad for the Packers that they're just gonna have no choice. At some point, they're just gonna have no choice. But like, okay, he's the guy that gives us the chance to win the game. You got to get him.
yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I would take Dubs over Juju, I guess, if like we're talking about those two guys. But he's going ahead of Tyler Lockett, ahead of um, DJ Moore. He's going ahead of George Pickens, Treylon Burks. Um, I don't know. I guess like I don't hate the ranking that he's in at wide receiver, but I just think it's kind of like a pretty flat tier once you get to that point. And I'm maybe looking in other directions there,
Right.
assuming I've already scooped a handful of wide receivers. I don't think there's like a ton separating Dubs from even someone like Jamison Williams in this resurrection format, assuming we get him back at some point. So I might just kind of like attack that same breakout rookie wide receiver profile, but just get it from a guy who has higher draft capital and is going at a cheaper price. But I don't hate the
Right.
Dubs
There's plenty of
value.
very talented receivers in that range.
Yeah. Quick hitter, Gallup, again, similar point to Rondale Moore. He's back in like almost a full-time role in the 80 to 85% range his first week back. I think that's pretty bullish. I'm scooping Gallup in any leagues where he's available, and maybe even firing him in DFS a little bit. Because I think there could be some breakout games for Gallup, even if he didn't earn targets in his first week back. Drico, anything? We're now moved on to the last tier of wide receivers that we're going to talk about today. Guys in the 40 to 65% of routes run category. Some names I've never heard of here, but anybody that pop out to you as interesting on this chart?
Honestly, not maybe. Maybe I'm wrong, but not really. It does kind of look like a lot of lower talent wide receivers playing lower amounts of snaps and getting lower opportunity. Probably the biggest thing that pops out to me is sadness at seeing KJ Hamler in the cardio specialist section.
That's a sad one with David Bell too. Yeah, I don't think there's anything like huge to talk about in this chart. I will say I think McKenzie and Duvernay are interesting from the perspective that they had injured teammates. McKenzie with Crowder, I think, has a pretty serious ankle injury, and Duvernay with Bateman having a foot sprain. And those guys have earned decent, not great, but decent roles on limited routes. So yeah, maybe more in the DFS flyer category there. And then Julio, I think I was excited about Julio after week one. I now think he's more of a contingent value bet than someone you can really start confidently. But I think when he is on the field, he's a guy that Brady is going to be looking to. I think they're just going to be a lot more conservative with how much they play him. At least we saw that last week where Gage was running ahead of him. And I think they may be kind of like in Gronk mode with him where they're going to sort of rest him for the playoffs. But if anything were to happen to Mike Evans or Godwin again, I think Julio should be stashed as sort of a contingent play.
We don't have him on the chart because I don't believe he's gotten enough routes or targets. But with the amount of injuries Buffalo have gotten, I think McKenzie's banged up. I think Crowder's actually hurt now.
McKenzie has a concussion. Yeah.
Gabe is banged up. Someone that does kind of pop out a little bit is Khalil Shakur. He's only ran 19 routes in 2 games. But he does have 50% weighted target per route run. And that, as somebody who could play more a lot more snaps in an explosive offense, I think he's a rookie that we should be keeping tabs on. If you are struggling for wide receiver and you need some upside at wide receiver, would be very interested in him. And let's see, where is he in he's the last pick I think he's an excellent last pick in the resurrection. He's probably an interesting play in DFS. Like, just somebody who an exciting rookie who has done decent with opportunity and could get a higher share in future weeks.
Yep. And along those lines, another guy not in this chart, Sky Moore's role, it's worth noting that did increase quite a bit. I think he had only seen like 3 to 8 snaps in the first couple weeks, and he was up closer to 25% or something like that in week 4. So that's another guy to monitor if he's been dropped in any leagues. Even in your like shallower leagues, I would recommend adding Sky Moore, because like we talked about in Kansas City, none of these guys are doing anything besides Kelsey, really. Juju's like been the best, but still very meh from a target earning perspective. So if Sky Moore is good, there's an easy path for him to explode there. So I think
small sample size, 83% weighted target per route run, like only 18 routes, but that's absolutely elite. Even if that were to regress some and he were to get a better role, like that's a very kind of productive situation you're looking at there.
Yep. So that's Sky Moore in all your leagues for sure.
Easily worth $125 in the main event.
What remind me what my recommended bid was and what was the second lowest bid? Did I nail that, or I forget? No, in our main event, that we had a heated discussions about the value of Sky Moore, which is what we're referring to. We ended up getting him, and I think we're all ultimately happy, especially since we had some injuries at wide receiver. But let's move on to tight end to finish up the show, Drico.
He's laughing at Casey's comment. We need to put Kenny Galladay in his own quadrant. That's the quiet quitting. The quiet quitting quadrant.
That's the retiring at halftime quadrant. We can put him and Allen Robinson in there. Oh man, Kenny Galladay looks bad. Oh yeah, I guess like finishing up wide receiver, that Galladay point just got me thinking. I think the Giants wide receiver situation is like so disgusting right now that you should be adding Tony and Wan'Dale Robinson in any league you can. I think they're both probably like they're going to be owned in your main event type leagues, but in your shallower leagues, they're probably on the wire. And I'm definitely interested in those guys because there's an easy path for them to emerge. The number 1 wide receiver right now for the Giants is like Richie James and David Sills and Darius Slayton, who I thought was banished. He's back in there running routes. So grab Wan'Dale and Tony for sure.
Right. I picked 155 for Tony. I wasn't drafting him at all in early. But at 155 and with the shorter season, even one Tony game probably gets you like I don't like talking about paying off ADP, but it's just like the hurdle that he needs to hit at his new price is so low that he does become a screaming value.
Yep. Okay. Cool. I totally agree with that. Let's finish with tight end quickly. So I think here, this chart, people are going to be worried about Kyle Pitts, and I think we have to talk people off the ledge one last time. The role is not great. It's still from a target earning perspective and from an ADOT perspective. However, he's still seeing the second highest targets per route run of any tight end, or sorry, third highest targets per route run of any tight end that's seeing more than 60% of their team's routes. He's seeing the highest ADOT of any tight end, seeing more than 60% of their team's routes. So he is sort of being treated like a wide receiver, like an elite wide receiver when he's on the field running routes, but he is pass blocking a lot more than you would like. And that part of it is annoying. But again, like I would still be taking Pitts as the third tight end off the board after Andrews and Kelsey. I just think there is like quite a big tier break from Andrews, Kelsey to Pitts compared to how I saw at the beginning of the year. But
and now he's going to pick 48.
Yeah.
So he's going to where Waller was going at certain points in the offseason last year. So, I mean, it's one of those things where the price is caught up to the role. And that is definitely a situation where, a situation where the role isn't what you want it to be. The situation isn't what it to be, but the talent is. And if you can take a discounted bet on that talent and then the situation goes your way, like, can you imagine like the money printing if Kyle Pitts does hit at pick 50? Like,
yeah.
Last year when I won the FFPC best ball tournament, 11 of 12 teams had Mark Andrews just because he was so cheap because of the situation, and he smashed so hard because of the talent. And obviously, you need some crazy things to happen for that to be Kyle Pitts, but it is now that sort of price and talent where you could get something like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Chris says, "Why grab Pitts when you can take Everett?" Obviously that's somewhat sarcastic, but I think it's worth noting that Everett's role here is pretty good. 20% targets per route run, close to a 10 ADOT, which is what we see with some of the top tight ends. So, he's not running all of the routes for his team, but I think that when he's on the field, Herbert is looking to him, and he kind of looks like a wide receiver out there. I don't know if I'm fooled by the fact he's wearing number 7 this year, but when I see him catch the ball, I'm like, oh, that wide receiver looks good. Who is that? And then it's Gerald Everett. He has some yak ability, so I like Everett just from the perspective that he's running enough routes and is on an explosive offense on a team that doesn't have like great secondary pass catchers. So I certainly like Everett. Certainly where he was going this summer. Now the price has caught up to that a little bit. He's going at pick 93 in the best ball resurrection. So, I'm actually maybe going to backtrack a little bit on my take. At that price, I'm probably like looking towards other positions. That's a little expensive, but I guess compared to where you drafted him this summer, you should be really happy about Everett, given his role and performance so far.
So would you take Everett over Hockenson? I asked that as he scored. Hockenson scored 40 points last week.
Yeah, I would take Hockenson over Everett. I'm just a little bit more of a believer in the talent with Hockenson with that draft capital, and he has a bit of a stronger role. But I'm kind of, I don't know. I don't know if I'm taking either at the 90s. There's just so many tight ends going later than that I'm comfortable with. If I'm not getting one of the lead guys, I'm probably just waiting and taking the Hayden Hurst, Evan Ingram, Tyler Conklin types, 5 rounds later.
Cool. I did watch Hayden Hurst on Thursday night, and you don't really see it here, but he kind of looks like a beast.
Yeah,
but
he's out there, man. He's got the red flow going out there as well. Looks good.
But he's definitely more of a tight end than a receiver.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Hurst is good. I mean, like, it just goes back to the principle of, get guys who have like full-time roles on good offenses, and even if they're not that good, they can profit. And I think Hurst hasn't been like this amazing smash, but I think you're definitely happy in as sort of like a tight end two in best ball. That's gonna give you some spikes there. I didn't have a ton else to hit on the tight ends, Drico. I think maybe like something worth noting is that Albert O, who does show up here, his role has like been evaporated. I think he got one snap last week, and Dulcich, from the latest reporting, I think is due back this week. So
I think they can release him from IR or whatever the right term is.
Yeah, activate him. Yeah,
activate him. Yeah, but I don't know if they're ready to play him yet. But I definitely very interested now in Dulcich at pick 214.
Yeah. So I just looked into it. Dulcich apparently is not going to play Thursday, but he could. I think he's due back soon. So I'm probably I'm trying to maybe add Dulcich for $1 on teams where I need a tight end before like he gets hyped up. He could be nothing. He could not be good, but I think there's opportunity for him. They liked him in the preseason. They clearly don't like Alberto. So I'm looking at Dulcich for cheap in some of these leagues. Let's
and now for the next section, join our Patreon. I don't love these special rewards.
So this is if you want to see the tight ends with 10 to 40% of routes run, that is actually behind the paywall. People have been begging me to release that chart, but we gotta make a living somehow.
That's so good. So Sam has held true to his word, and the way we're gonna do this, you're gonna get my side of it for free, but if you want to hear Sam's side, you got to pay up. No, actually, I believe he messaged me just before this that his laptop charger was acting funny, and that he might die at any moment, and it appears that he picked just the right amount, the right moment to for the battery to give out. So it looks like you're stuck with me to take us home through the backup tight end portion. Suppose really what we're looking for here is guys who, when they do get on the field, can earn target share. It does seem like the Browns have been using tight end a good bit. Harrison Bryant looks like someone with solid contingent value there. Jonnu Smith, if he can ever earn a bigger snap share, as usual, someone who could be exciting. But really, you were, I guess, tight end. You were looking to kind of churn and maybe take advantage of playing time situations spiking, kind of like when you can predict they happen. But that's gonna do us. I've lost the chart as Sam has dropped off the broadcast, and we will see you. We'll see you next week.